Welcome to How to Learn How to Play Chess. My name is Nick Sloan, and I am a class player on my way to expert, and I'm here to help you learn everything you need to know to get started with how to play chess. This will be a complete, easy beginner's guide for anybody that doesn't know how to play. We're going to go over the pieces and how they move, the board setup, and how to move those pieces on the board, and what all of those things would look like. If you're a new player or if you're a parent trying to teach your kids, this is going to be a great video for you. So let's get started. All right, so this is the normal chess board. You have 64 squares, 8 dark squares, and 8 light squares. I'm sorry, not 8. 64, 32 and 32, light and dark squares. You have all of your ranks. 1 through 8, as you can see, and you have all of your files, which are A through H. That's going to be important at some point, but as you might know, there are chess notation, and any square correlates with a number and a letter. So this particular square would be C3, this square would be F7, and so on. So those types of things, it gets you an idea of how the chessboard is going to be set up. So we have a few pieces when it comes to the chessboard. We have a king. We have a queen. We have a rook. We have a knight. We have a bishop. And we have a pawn. And this goes for the same on the other side. When you look at the black side, they all look exactly the same. Only they're black. Pretty even. There we go. All right, let's clear the board again. So the first thing that you need to know is about the king. The king moves in one direction, in any single direction, one space. He can move to any of these squares in one turn, here, 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 and so on. There is a special move that the king has. When there's a king on the board, and it does also have a rook, there's a few rules in this. You can also castle, which will then take your rook like this. You can only do that in the event that you have not moved your king and you are not castling through check, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The next piece that we'll talk about is the queen. The queen is the most powerful piece and can move in any direction, as many spaces as possible. So you can see all of the spaces that this particular queen covers. So there's that. The queen cannot jump over any pieces, so if there is a piece in its way, it would only be able to either take it or it would be stuck. So this queen cannot move forward, and it can only move diagonally backwards or left and right. So it cannot jump over any pieces. Clear those pieces. The next piece is the rook. The rook moves horizontally, horizontally and vertically in any direction. It also is bound to the same rules as the queen. It cannot go past a piece, but if this was a black pawn, you could take that piece. The knight, take that off the board, moves in an interesting fashion. These are all the places it can move. So it moves in an L shape. So as you can see, it can move to all these locations. This is the trickiest piece to learn how to play, because this piece also can jump over pieces. So you can see the knight actually covers 8 squares. So let's move that. The bishop, either light squared or dark squared, can move as many spaces as it likes on its own color. So you can see it has a fair, oh my goodness, nope, that's not what we want. A fair range here. So there's a good amount of space it can go. Same as with the black bishop or the dark squared bishop. Same thing, it stays on the black squares and it moves in any direction. Very good. And then the pawn, the humble pawn. Each one of these particular pieces actually denotes a certain amount of pawns, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The pawn is interesting because it can move up the board one at a time until it reaches the final square. On the first move and the first move only, for any pawn, so if you have not moved your pawn yet, you do have the ability to move it too. So you could move it to here or to here. And that is on any one of the pawn's first moves. The other interesting thing is how the pawn actually takes. The pawn can only capture diagonally. So if there's a pawn here, we can capture that pawn like this. If there's a piece here, we can capture that piece like this. If there's a pawn in front of it, it can capture this way, and this pawn can capture this way, but they can't move. They're stuck. They don't move. They're going to stay there until something takes care of them. All right. Now we'll take a look at the board setup. So if we reset the board, this is what a full board setup looks like. So you have the rooks in each corner on any one of the pieces. You have the knights next to them. You have the bishops next to them. And then you have the king and the queen in the middle. The nice thing to note about the queens is that they like to be on their own color. So the queens are always on the D square when get started, and the king is always right next to that. Then the pawns get set up on the first row completely. So we're going to set this board up together. This is what it would look like if you actually physically had a board. You would set up all your pawns like this. They go on the second row. If you're black, they're on the 7th row. All right. And then as we discussed before, your rooks go in the corners. The black rooks go on the 8th rank. The white ones go on the 1st rank. And then the next pieces are your knights, which go right next to them, like so. And then your bishops go right next door. Okay. And then your queen on her own color, and then the kings across the board. And now we have set up our first chess board together. Now that we have all of our pieces on the board and we know how they're all set up, it is time to play and learn how to play a game. So there's a few extra things that you need to know when it comes to playing a game. A lot of times, this is where the most difficult part is once you learn how to use the pieces, the next step is learning how to use them together. So a lot of things in this particular part of the game, it's called the opening. So the opening is just a matter of how you start your pieces and how you decide you want to develop your pieces. Now, in this particular instance, we're trying to get a pawn in the center of the board. Black is matching. I wanted to move my knight to here. They move their knight to here because we're now both attacking this particular pawn. So he has stopped me from taking that pawn and I am attacking it. So there's also names to openings. This one in particular is called the Ruy Lopez. There's many other ones to learn, but that's not important right now. What's important is to get the idea of getting your pieces out so that way you can learn how to play the game. So the first thing you want to do is focus on getting your pieces castled, or getting your pieces out and castled. So we wanted to move a pawn in front of our king or our queen, either the E pawn or the D pawn. When I reference the E pawn or the D pawn, that is talking about those letters and numbers we were talking about before. That's when it's talking about notation. We'll talk a little bit more about notation as we kind of progress. But the whole idea of the opening is to get castled and get your pieces to safety. So black wants to get their pieces together, and now they are also castled. This is a special move that you get to do as a castled. As a king, if you did not actually move your king or move your rooks, you would be able to castle. So the idea of the opening is to get your pieces out in a number of ways, so that way you can connect your rooks. The whole idea of the opening is to get your rooks connected and all your pieces developed. When you get to this point, now I'm not saying that these are the best moves. I'm just making a series of moves to get you an idea of getting into the game and getting through the opening. The opening is once you get all of your pieces developed and your rooks can see one another back and forth. So as you can see, our rooks are together. Both positions are completely developed, and at this point we can now continue on with the game. So we have completed our development. Our rooks can see one another, and now we have reached what's called the middle game. And this is where a lot of games are most likely lost, because it gets into the attacking and defending portion of the game. Now, remember before how we talked about how each piece has a value? Pawns are 1, bishops and knights are worth 3, rooks are worth 5, and queens are worth 9. The king doesn't really have a value, which there was an interesting article about a king having a value, but for the sake of this, you don't need to know that the king has a value or not. If you are checkmated, you lose the game is over. So obviously it has value, but we'll get into that. It's semantics later. So the idea about attacking and defending right now is that pieces can see one another as they are on the board. Bishops move diagonally, knights can move in their L shape or a 7 shape, depending on how you look at it, 2 over and 1, 1 over and 2, depending how you look at things. And what's interesting is the idea when you start playing is you want to be able to trade equal pieces for equal pieces. So right now it is white's move, and if you were to make a trade, a decent trade would be a knight for a bishop. That's 3 points for 3 points. You're not losing anything, and black isn't losing anything. So you now have taken a knight for a bishop, and both pieces are equal. So black didn't lose anything, and white didn't lose anything. The game is still fairly equal. Now, sometimes what you might want to try to do is gain an advantage by trying to get a piece for a lesser piece for a bigger piece. So the idea being, let's say we wanted to move this pawn. Now let's pretend for a minute that the pawn could not take here and they completely missed this move, which is going to happen. You're going to miss moves. And they decided to try to do something else, like move their bishop here. Now the idea for white is that they want to gain an advantage by taking the bishop. Now I've just traded my pawn for a bishop. Now, as you can see down here, it shows +2. I'm winning by 2 points right now, and as you can see the evaluation, it says 5. We'll get into that later, but that's a completely different thing. Right now, the evaluation thinks that I'm up 5.5 points, which means I'm up a rook and almost a pawn, because of how the position is and what pieces are on the board and where they're located. Now, when you're beginning, all I want you to think about is piece value for piece value. So you don't want to trade a big piece for a small piece. Let's say I move this up, you missed it, we did another move and I moved here. You would not want to take this pawn, which is worth 1, for a queen, which is worth 9. That's a huge, what they call a blunder. So you are now completely behind and white is completely winning. So when you're starting out, what I want you to think about is trading a piece value for piece value. So trade bishops for bishops, or bishops for knights, and knights for bishops, rooks for rooks, queens for queens. It's not always going to happen. You're going to get frustrated. Things are going to happen, and you're going to lose your pieces for lower value pieces. This is how you start to learn how to play chess. But as you start playing and you get into more positions, just note, if you can trade a piece for the same value piece, it's a decent trade. As you're getting started, if you can adhere to that rule, it's going to be really good. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. There's going to be times where you might want to what's called sacrifice, where you might take a big piece and give it away to get a better position. But that's way advanced stuff, which we'll get into other videos. But for right now, just focus on trying to trade same piece for same piece, or same value piece for same value piece. I think that'll help you a lot. All right, as you progress through a chess game, you're going to go through the middle game, which is what we just talked about. You're going to reach an end game, and that's usually when you have one or two minor pieces or major pieces. Your major pieces are your kings and queen, or your rooks and queens. Your minor pieces are your bishops and knights. And you're going to get into what's called an end game when you have one or two pieces, major or minor, left on the board. So this is what's considered an end game. And the idea to complete an end game is to still try to checkmate the king, but you still want to try to gain an advantage. Now, you could probably look at my analysis here, and this is a really goofy setup. I just made some random moves to get to a point where we were at an end game. You're going to have wild end games that are going to look really, really crazy like this. So the idea is to try to simplify down. And when I say simplify, I mean try to trade your pieces so that you can make the position a little bit easier to evaluate. So right now, it's pretty even. We both have two rooks. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns, and white also has 5 pawns. So it's anybody's game. Anything could happen. The really cool thing about pawns that I didn't mention before is that if you get them to the other side, you can promote them. So if I were to march this all the way down and it wasn't taken and I got to here, I could trade it to a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight, depending on what I want. And you can add that. If you were at the beginning of the game and you got a pawn all the way to the other side, you could still promote and just get an extra of whatever. So you could have 3 knights if you wanted, if you already had 2. So that's called pawn promotion, which is really cool. But as you progress through the game, the idea is to try to simplify all of your pieces down so that way you can gain an advantage or complete the game to the best of your ability. So obviously I'm just making some random moves here. They're not really super, I'm not thinking about them at all. There's no rhyme or reason. I'm just kind of making them to show you the idea of what it looks like. But we want to trade pieces. So now that, okay, now we're only down to 1 rook and 1 knight. Sorry, 1 rook and 1 black rook. And we can just make some random moves here. I'm not making anything important or anything like that. So here we go. We now reach a complete endgame, and it's just some kings and a pawns, which would be really difficult to take care of if I try to get all of my pieces. The idea with pawns is you want to take all of your pieces and try to get them to the other side so you can get a piece back. Just for the sake of this, we're going to try to do this. And as you can see, sometimes it comes down to a race and who's faster. So I've got my queen. You've also got your queen. There we go. And then we would continue on and play from here. So this is what you would consider an end game. Okay, we have reached an end game. It's now down to 2 kings and a pawn. And the idea is we want to promote that pawn and we want to get it all the way to the other side and get a queen or a rook so that way we can checkmate the other king. So we're going to go through a basic king and pawn endgame versus a king to show you how you can convert this into a win. Right now it looks even, but that pawn is actually huge. Mainly because as we move forward, we're going to try to get our king to push our pawn all the way to the other side. So he can't move. All right, we've now are able to convert this to a win pretty easily. The king cannot go next to the king, so it can't move forward. The pawn is protecting both of these squares, so the king is stuck. It has to move back. King can't move here or here. King has to move to the side because it cannot move next to the king. And now we have reached ourselves to a point where we now can promote to a queen, a rook, or a bishop. Queen is the easiest, but you have to be careful. So now what you want to do with your king is chase the other king to the side of the board. And as they move forward, we now can deliver checkmate. That's game over. And this is an easy way to deliver checkmate. There are a couple other checkmates that are really easy to review. So if we go back here and let's take a look at a new board, let's set up a position. We'll clear this and we'll do a rook, 2 rooks, and a king. So here's the idea. We're just going to, you can't move forward because you're in check. That doesn't work. Oh my goodness. Whoops. My apologies. Let's clear the board. We have a king and 2 rooks. And then we've got a king over here. All right, so the king wants to try to push forward. We're going to stop the king. It can't move forward because the rook covers all of these. They call this a battery. So as the king moves down, these are taking care of all of these particular squares. You have to move forward, check, and we move the king back, and now we can deliver checkmate. So the king is in check, and it can't move to any squares. They're all covered because they are actually being covered by every one of those particular rooks. Those are 2 common checkmates I think would be super helpful for anybody that's trying to learn how to play chess. So as you can see, this is a checkmate. We've gone through all of the portions of the game. We've talked about the opening, we talked about the middle game, and we talked about the end game. So in the opening, you're going to want to try to figure out how to look at a couple openings. You can take a look at the Ruy Lopez, the London, the King's Indian defense, or the Caro-Kann. These are all different openings that have a specific move order, and you can follow them and read the books, and you can follow the notation when it says rook to e8. You move the rook to e8. These are pretty basic. I think it's easy to figure out. You can follow some of those so you can get an idea of how you'd move your pieces in the opening. In the middle game, there's middle game books out there where that talk about strategy, positioning. It also talks about, my dogs are in the background. It also talks about tactics and how you can try to leverage one of your pieces to gain a bigger piece. And then also the end game talking about checkmates and basic patterns like that. There's many books and many resources on this. I'm going to produce many other videos on all of these topics as well. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope this has helped you get started in learning how to play chess. I know it's a very high level overview, but as you look more at my channel, you'll find more videos about how to play chess and how to dive into things that you might be struggling with. So thanks for watching, everybody. Take care and be well.